Today is May the 6th, 2018. We're studying 1 Samuel chapters 14 and 15, continuing from our study of last week. And I wrote up on the board what the topic is. We began the topic last week, and we're going to finish it up, I hope, this week. And the topic is the fall of Saul, what went wrong in his life. As we know, Saul was the first king of Israel. We read something really profound last week that happened in his life. Remember, the appointment of Saul as the king of Israel came about as a result of what?
The people's desire for a king.
That's right. And the people of Israel wanted a king, and were their motives good or bad in desiring a king?
Bad.
Bad. Why is it? What was their principal motive in desiring a king?
It was there.
Everybody else had a king.
That's right. Everybody else is doing it. And what else?
We gotta get one, yeah.
That's right. And so they wanted a king.
Their own doings.
That's right. And they wound up selecting a king who was tall, he was handsome, he was strong, and everybody thought, yeah, this would be the great guy. But God was not pleased with that at all. And God said, when the outcry of the people came that they were demanding a king, Samuel took it to the Lord, and the Lord said, Samuel, you know, the people aren't rejecting you, they're rejecting me. That if Israel's heart was right, they would be looking to me as their king. And if and when I, the Lord, thought it was proper for them to have a fleshly king, then I would select their king and I would appoint their king. But what have they done? They've taken things into their own hands. They've looked around. They've seen the other nations around them. They're fearful. They're looking for a military leader. They're looking for someone to protect them, as if a human being could do a better job of protecting anything better than God himself could do. So, God says, all right, if you want a king, you know, we'll anoint a king. And it's very interesting. We see in chapter 10, verse 6, and it says, talking about Saul, it says, then the Spirit of the Lord will come mightily and you shall prophesy with them, and you shall be changed into another man. So, it is said of Saul that even though he was fleshly, earthly, that he would be changed into another man. Then in verse 9 it says, this is in chapter 10, it says, then it happened, when he turned his back to leave Samuel, God changed his heart. And so we know that for just a relatively short period of time in Saul's life, he was a man after God's own heart, because God had changed his heart. God had changed him into another man. And it's interesting, we discussed it last week, that the first verse in chapter 13, even though it's subject to several translations, even among the translations that we have here, it starts off by saying, when Saul was 1 year old, he began to reign, and he reigned for 2 years, or he reigned until he was 2 years old. And you think, well, what? He was a toddler? No. It was the new man, that the new man that God had changed, the man whose heart God had changed, that he basically served. He was a man after God's own heart. He started in his first year, and by the time he got to his second year, he was done. And then what happened to him? He had a serious relapse. He relapsed back into the flesh. And we began to see the commencement of his relapse in chapter 13. And one of the things I wanted to do is to make a list of the things that were the characteristics of Saul's downfall, because I think the reason why these negative things are recorded in the Scripture, we talked about this again last week, that the Scriptures don't whitewash the facts. We're not given just the positive aspects of Israel, we're given negative aspects of Israel. And I think we are given these things because it is God's intent that we should learn from the mistakes of the patriarchs and from the history of the Israelites. So we saw last week in chapter 13 that Saul's downfall began, his backsliding began. That despite the fact that God had changed his heart, we see here that he begins to stray. What is the first thing that Saul did? Last week we pointed out two things that Saul did that were offensive to God. And what were they? Do you recall?
He didn't wait on the Lord.
Very good. One, he did not wait on the Lord. And I shudder as I write that. How many of us in here have not waited on the Lord as we should? Thankfully, God is merciful and he extends his grace to us. But, I think all of us are guilty of that, and we need to see what happened to Saul, that he fell, and he fell hard. And the first thing he did wrong is he didn't wait on the Lord. And he wasn't asked to wait for a long time. Some of God's people are asked to wait, years and decades and lifetimes. Look how long Abraham and Sarah had to wait for God to fulfill the promise that he made to them about bringing them a son. All right, they were very impatient with that, and they made error because why? They didn't wait on the Lord. They took things into their own hands. But waiting on the Lord, how long had Saul been instructed to wait?
7 days.
7 days. Not a long period of time. But he didn't do what God told him to do. He didn't wait on the Lord. And then what was the second thing he did that we learned last time?
He made the sacrifice himself.
Yep, exactly.
Those politicians nowadays wouldn't know what to do. Little sling wood on each other, 7 days.
Yep.
7 days for voting.
So he's making the sacrifice himself, H-I-M-S-E-L. He took unto himself the role of the priest, because it was the priest, particularly it was going to be Samuel or some other priest who was to make the sacrifice. But he thought, all right, no big deal, I'll just make the sacrifice and that'll be as good as if it's done by the priest. What's wrong with that thinking?
There was the designated person to do that
Yeah.
by God.
Yeah. And that is the beginning. These two things are the beginning. They're a very subtle beginning of what ultimately wound up to be Saul's problem and many of our problems, and the problem of many people whose lives are recorded in the Scriptures. And that is dependence upon self, or reliance upon the flesh rather than God. And look, that's something we've talked about a lot. We're going to continue to talk about a lot, because that is one of the basic human characteristics that we have to overcome if we're going to be obedient to God, and that is the human tendency to put confidence in our own flesh or in the flesh of others. That is a very difficult thing to overcome. It's a very difficult thing to recognize, right? In Saul's case, he thought, well, all right, God wants a sacrifice, so all right, doesn't really matter who makes the sacrifice. That's wrong. Just like in our case, and what this is a foreshadowing of course, is our need to depend upon the sacrifice that God himself provided, rather than any sacrifice we can make, right? And what do we have a tendency to do? We have a tendency to rely upon the things we do, our own performance, rather than saying no. What is sufficient is the sacrifice that God provided through Christ. And that's what we constantly have to rely upon and put our confidence in, not our own performance. All right. So,
It was impressive on me this week, number one. We become impatient, number one. But number two, waiting on the Lord, that it seems like you're not doing anything, that you're just sitting there. But it was impressive on me this week that waiting is action. It's an action verb. And waiting is doing something. It's waiting for him. And I guess I needed that message, but I went, whoa. So I'm just sharing what I was told this week.
I guess it's a combination of waiting on him and trusting that he is going to provide what he said he would.
Right. In his own time.
In his own time.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
And it's hard
It
for
seems
us to be willing to wait. That's
I
hard.
seem to do things I will when it's out of my hands. And I have no answer to it. I said, what happens now?
Yeah.
Well, I should do that all the time.
That's right.
And what you just said was, you're talking to God. What happens now? Or just pour out your heart. This is hard. I don't know what to
I don't know
do.
what to do.
You know.
I don't know
So
which way to
I
go
guess
with this.
waiting and praying could go together. I don't know.
Yeah. One author put it this way, too often we think, that hey, don't just stand there, do something. Well, others would be saying, don't just do something, stand there.
And listen.
And listen, that's right, and listen. and wait for God, because too often, you know, we invent what we think the solution to the problem is, right? And we ought to be disciplined enough to wait. Okay.
But, you know, you gotta ask yourself too, you don't take every decision you make to bring before God, or are you supposed to take everything?
Yeah.
Because look at all the decisions you make in a single day. And if you,
With you owning a business,
yeah,
yours is twice, 3 times what we would do.
Yeah, so it's constant decision making all the time. I'm just wondering, I mean, I don't know how that works. For the big ones, yes, I'm thinking, but then you gotta sit awake, God says do it, so it sort of just makes you kind of wonder, you just.
What's the dividing line? And here's the question, and I have the same dilemma myself, and I have to keep asking myself, who has a better plan for my business, God or me?
You know that?
Yeah. So that's the answer to that. Well, should I trouble God with the little things?
What's for supper?
Who says that's a little thing? That's usually on the top of my list. By the time I wake up.
Mine too.
Yeah. It's a matter of priorities.
What's for
Yeah,
supper
but-
is still a blessing from God.
So-
Say again?
Yes. It is a blessing.
What's for supper is still a blessing from God.
Sure
Many
it is.
people don't have supper.
Yeah.
You're
But
right.
I thought
If
you
we
would
have
tell me what to
choice.
cook.
I open the freezer and I say, pick something out, whatever pops out, well, there.
Well, I walk down those grocery store aisles and I keep thinking something's gonna jump out and say, cook me.
Sometimes it does, it's like I had no idea, and it's like, oh.
Well, when that possum runs out in front of your cart, don't get the wrong message there.
Don't worry.
I pray for guidance, okay? I pray for guidance during every single day, okay? So I'm praying for guidance, and I guess you might say I'm assuming that I'm relying on the guidance
You're
in
trusting
the hopes
Him.
that I'm not jumping ahead and making decisions that I should ask for just that decision, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, no, but when you start out your day, and your day ought to start out, God, more than anything else today, I want your will to be done. I want to live my life in accordance with your plan, because I recognize that your plan is better than mine. And what does God ask us to do, or invite us to do? He invites us to pray for wisdom. And if we pray in the right way, He'll give us wisdom. And wisdom is, and I think, is kind of filling in the blanks, you know, the difference between the big things and the little things. But He'll prompt us as to what to do on every decision that needs to be made. He also says that He'll give us understanding, right? He'll give us understanding not only of the scriptures, which we should pray for, but He'll give us understanding of the events that come about in our lives. Because God is constantly giving us a message about His plan through what happens in our lives, through unexpected things. And so we should be praying for understanding. God, let me understand what it means that a client calls me up on the phone and asks for such and such, you know. And it may seem to be a trivial thing, but, you know, if you're living your life according to God's plan, nothing is trivial, right? And then also, you ask God, and he offers to give us knowledge. And you think about, well, what is knowledge? God will actually give us knowledge of facts that we need to know. And sometimes He does it in a supernatural fashion.
For
the way that we
for
can
that day or for that problem.
Right. For that day, for that particular circumstance, God will give us wisdom, He'll give us understanding, and He'll give us knowledge. And sometimes you think about, well, knowledge. Knowledge very often relates to specific facts that God will actually feed to us, you know. And again, sometimes it comes to us in what we would call illogical ways, supernatural ways, but He'll do that for us, you see. And so, you know, and I see some nodding heads, so we've all experienced that before. Sometimes we've got knowledge of things that we just don't understand where it came from or how it came about, but hey, I have knowledge and I just know this is correct. The same way He'll give us understanding of the circumstance. He'll give us wisdom, and that is how to deal with it, just on a step-by-step basis. But part of that is waiting on the Lord and being patient. Don't think that you can jump 2 or 3 steps ahead, because there may be something to learn in step 1, and step 2, and step 3, even though maybe laborious and maybe not exactly what you want to do, but it's often a step-by-step process. So, wait. Is it easy? No, it's not. We all tend to jump ahead, but hey, that's where Saul went. Saul went wrong because he did not wait on the Lord. God says, wait for or Samuel said, wait for 7 days. And so he waited 7 days, and then he went off on his own. And it was just right after he went on his own that Samuel came there to do what he was going to do. So sometimes you got to wait longer than what you think the Lord wants you to wait. But the idea is wait, and while you're waiting, do what, Brother Kenny? Listen. Pray and listen.
Listen.
Yeah, that's it.
Listen, be still.
But
Be still.
also, you're supposed to be doing the last thing that God commanded you to do
Yeah.
before He leads you in a new direction.
That is
So you
sorry.
just have to be continuously,
Yeah. Say that again. That is extremely important, what you just said.
you have to do the last thing, the last action that He told you to do. You continue that until such time as He leads you in a new direction.
And complete it
Yeah,
for completion.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's hard too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But, God kind of plays that game with this of connect the dots, Like, as Wanda said, God, when you know that God told you to move in a certain direction, keep going in that direction. And you think, well, all right, okay, here I go. God, I'm waiting for more instructions. Eventually, He will give you an instruction. He may change direction. He may say, go the same direction, or may say, drop back a little bit. But, as Wanda said, keep going in the direction or down the task, perform the task that the last time God spoke to you and told you to do something. Just keep doing it, all right? Until He gives you another instruction. And then be patient, wait, pray, and listen. We're getting a lot of good instruction here today. Thank you for this. This is the Spirit working through everybody here, because these are all good life lessons that we're getting today.
After you're completely through with the instructions that He gave you, you said keep on doing it. Do you repeat, or do you ask the Lord to send you some different views on what you're supposed to be doing? I think that we can get in a rut if we're not careful.
We can, but the question, and you raised an excellent question, and that is, when do we know that we're complete with the last instruction that God gave us? And I don't know the answer to that,
He'll tell us, we will know.
Yeah, I think we'll know. Sometimes, God tells us to do something, and we think, all right, well, now I'm done, so where's the next one? Sometimes we think we're done, but we're not done, And so sometimes it's, just like the instructions say, you gotta rinse and repeat, So just keep doing that same thing, and keep going down that same road until God changes your direction. Because there may be something else to do on that road that He sends you down, We just don't know.
And usually, He will give you a new task or a new direction when that one is complete,
That's right.
or as you are nearing completion of that task.
Yep, that's exactly right. And we've all been there. We have seen times in our lives where we absolutely know, and we can connect the dots, and we can see that this particular point in my life, I can see where God took me from this place to this place very clearly. And it's 5 or 6 different steps. And then sometimes you go a long period of time and you say, well, I don't know that God was really guiding me. Well, you know what? Sometimes that last leg of the journey that He put you on is the one that's it's going to have the longest duration. And then you say, well, then I went for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and then 40 years, and then He moved me in a different direction. All right, then I really felt for a period of time that I know He moved me from here to here. Okay, and He probably did if you recognize that. And you say, well, but it's been 5 years since that last move. Well, maybe another 5 years, maybe another 20 years. But as Wanda said, just keep doing the same, the thing that God told you to do last time that you were really certain that He was moving in your life. That's good advice. Really good advice. Okay, chapter 14. Now, in chapter 14, we sort of changed directions, and so the lead characters in the last couple of chapters have been Samuel and Saul, and now we're going to focus on Jonathan a little bit. And Jonathan represents something different. I want you to think about as we read this, what Jonathan represents, particularly when you contrast Jonathan to Saul, and how they're different and what their differences mean. Okay, Nancy, would you start chapter 14 for us, verse 1?
One day Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the Philistine garrison on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree that was at Migron. The troops that were with him were about 600 men, along with Ahijah, son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord of Shiloh, carrying an ephod. Now the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. and
Pause right there, just saying, what is the ephod or the ephod?
First,
Yeah, there's a picture of it right there, yeah. And what it was, the significance of this is it's a breastplate, or it's an apparel, but what was carried within the ephod?
The Urim and the Thummim.
That's right, the two, like I think it's like dice that they would cast lots to determine the will of God, you know? And that's kind of what they did those days, and that's why he summoned the priest with the ephod, because it had the Urim and the Thummim to find out what God's will was. All right, read on, Nancy.
In the pass by which Jonathan tried to go over to the Philistine garrison, there was a rocky crag on one side and a rocky crag on the other. The name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other Senah. One crag rose on the north in front of Michmash, and the other on the south in front of Geba. Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will act for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few."
Pause right there. What does that say about Jonathan, that last expression that he made?
He's trusting in God.
Yeah, that he really is. He says, you know, what's going on in Israel at the time? Well, they're very oppressed. We'll see later on that they're hiding in caves and in holes because the Philistines are oppressing them. And so Jonathan rises up, and we're going to see later on, Saul doesn't know what Jonathan is doing at the time. So Jonathan is rising up, and what is the first thing he does? He's not relying upon his own strength. We see here, he says, "Come, let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will work for us. For the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few." That's a very important thing that